We're back again with the UFC preview show. We're going to take a look ahead at this Saturday night's UFC fight night card, which is being headlined by Kai Kara France and Amir Albazi. The first non-title flyweight fight on a fight night card since 2017. Harry, for any bonus points, how could you think of a name that possibly, who is the last two people that would have been in a non-title headline event on a UFC card in 2017?
At flyweight.
At flyweight, yeah.
So it's probably going to be Joseph Benavidez. It's not, is it?
No, you're lukewarm in around that, in around that, yeah. But let's say one fighter is very, very prominent in the UFC in the same division right now, and the other has since left and become a champion in another organization.
Chris Johnson and oh fuck, is it Tim Elliott?
No, I'll put you out of your misery. It was Brandon Moreno versus Sergio Pettis.
You know, I was going to say Moreno.
It was obviously too obvious, though, wasn't it?
And then I was like, yeah, it can't be Moreno. But fucking hell, Pettis Moreno. Wow.
Yeah, that's it. And this is the first one in almost 6 years that has been a non-title fight. So crazy stat. And I mean, it's a stat that tells a story. And I think we've talked about it time and time again with the UFC. Look, you're not going to meet bigger fans than, I think, myself, yourself, Shawnee, I think Spencer as well, are all high on the flyweight division, you know, #fly never die. But it seems to be in this constant battle with the UFC for notoriety to the division. One of the greatest fighters of all time was there for many years, a dominant champion, didn't kind of get the shine that he deserved for one reason or another. Then we go this long barren spell without this headlining event. Like we've got like non-top 30 heavyweights that have probably headlined a UFC fight night. And I think right now, the 125-pound division in the UFC is very talent rich. It's very exciting. And it has been for the last little while, let's be real. And we have still had to wait for 6 years to make a non-title UFC flyweight main event on a UFC card. What kind of story does that tell to you, Harry?
I think it's a good question. What type of story does that tell me? I think that it's, in a way, it tells me that the UFC has not kept up with modern MMA fans and their wants. Because obviously, when you look at a boxing bout, if you have Lomachenko versus Canelo, let's just say, two absolutely gargantuan names in the boxing world, it will do very, very, very well. If you do Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury, it will do better. And that's because they are heavyweights, they are big men, and for the longest time in combat sports, the largest man, the heavyweight champion of the world, has been a coveted prize as being the quote-unquote baddest man on the planet. We have seen that handed around with Francis Ngannou. We've seen it handed around now with Johnny Bones Jones, with Stipe Miocic. The list goes on and on and on and on and on, right? And so I think that there is an element of sort of, it's a very easy sell when you have a big, massive heavyweight and they do knockouts and they do viral things and all that stuff. Whereas when you watch a flyweight bout, especially an elite level flyweight bout, you're watching, in some ways, the elite of the elite from a technical perspective, from a speed perspective, from a dexterity and a dynamism perspective, because these guys don't have one hitter quitter power more often than not. And so I think the UFC have been lazy in their marketing by saying we're not going to give the flyweights a platform. And that's a shame because the fans...
Why would you think they've done that? Like, for me, looking, let maybe set you up a little bit better. Like, obviously, look at the heavyweight main events or the higher weight classes, where you do have larger impact on strikes, you do have more knockout percentages and everything like that. But you would think the premier mixed martial arts organization would be trying to promote pure mixed martial arts. And I think when you come to the 125-pound division, you're getting a pretty decent level of well-roundedness when it comes to these athletes from what we've seen through the years, and it's even getting better as well. It's baffling to me. Okay, I was a smaller guy and always have been a little bit larger now in my old age, but sure, look, these things happen. But I always appreciated the smaller guys. You know what I mean? Yeah, you might not get your knockouts. You might not get um devastating highlight reels or anything like that, but you're going to get entertainment, and you're going to get highly skilled individuals as well. And it seems like a no-brainer to put these into somewhat of a headline spot. They failed to do it, like we said, with Demetrius Johnson, and now they've waited 6 years. And I think they've only done this because there was a little bit of uproar recently about why there hasn't been any flyweights in a main event slot in a non-title fight.
I just think you hit the nail on the head, really, is that it's harder to market. And you sort of said you said a question, and that's, why wouldn't they do this, right? Wouldn't you expect the premier organization in mixed martial arts to try and promote the cleanest mixed martial arts? I think you would if you were an organization that was actively looking to promote the cleanest martial arts. And I don't think that's the case with the UFC, right? The UFC is trying to promote the UFC. And so the way that you promote the UFC is by hook or by crook, you get people watching. And the easiest thing to sell is the thing that sold the longest. And the thing that sold the longest is big hitters, knockouts, submissions, viral moments, highlight reels, etc., etc., etc. It's like, to me, the age-old thing is the Benson Henderson getting Showtime kicked, right? Everyone sees that highlight, has seen that highlight 10 million times, and everyone just expects that Benson gets finished there. So few people know that he didn't actually get finished there, and the fight continued, right? Yes, it was a fantastic kick. Yes, it looked beautiful and all of that stuff. But people they look at highlight reels, they see a highlight reel, and they're like, oh, well, that must have been a finish. And that's what you sell as the UFC. And so I think you've kind of summed it up perfectly, that the UFC want to sell the UFC, and that what they're trying to sell is elite level fighting, the best fighters in the world. But the best fighters in the world, or the most dominant fighters in the world, are easier sold when you watch one man lying on a canvas and another man with his arms aloft in the air.
True that. Yeah, very, very well said. Well, what we will be watching on Saturday night is a great main event, it has to be said, in Kaikara, France, and Amir Albazi. But the rest of the card, Harry, is not good. It's lower tier, and there's not too much to talk about really on it. We'll nitpick a couple of fights throughout this card. Obviously, we're going to focus a lot of our attention on the main event itself. But yeah, your thoughts on the card as a whole here. Is there anything that's sticking out to you? Obviously, we talked a little bit before. There's a couple of good fights that kicking off the main card, maybe one or two on the prelims as well. But I mean, we have Alex Caceres versus Daniel Pineda as your co-main event, which is just not good at all, really, to be honest. This card has left a lot to be desired, hasn't it?
It has. I mean, there are some names on here that I'm always interested to see. I'll never turn down a Jim Miller fight because I just think it's disrespectful to do so. I'm not going to turn down a Tim Elliott fight because I enjoy watching that style play out in the octagon. No, it's not the most efficient. No, it's not going to win you the most fights. No, it is not the smartest way to fight, but it's enjoyable, it's interesting, it's entertaining. I will never turn down a Goram Kutateladze fight. And I actually think Goram Kutateladze versus Jamie Mullarkey should be the co-main event. That is a fight that has far more jeopardy to it than Alex Caceres and Daniel Pineda. And then we move down the card and there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. We've got two big heavyweights that mean nothing at this point. And I don't mean that disrespectfully to Andrei Arlovski, but he's not making a title run anytime soon. He's just there in the division now. Maxim Grishin and Philip Lins, like, okay, Philip Lins has moved down to 205. Let's see if he can continue that run. Fine, I guess. But the card it's rough. Like, it's rough. It really is.
It really is. And we'll break down some of those fights on the card. We'll definitely brush through a lot of the other ones, but let's concentrate on the main event for a second. That's Kai Kara-France, former interim flyweight champion, coming back off of his defeat to Brandon Moreno, lost via liver kick, a TKO, and lost his chance of becoming undisputed flyweight champion. Comes in against Amir Albazi, one of the up-and-coming prospects in the flyweight division right now, a guy who's been pretty impressive in his short UFC tenure so far. Joined the promotion in 2020, picked up wins over Malcolm Gordon, Zaglas Amagulov, Francisco Figueiredo, and Alexandro Costa in his last fight. It's been a bit of a stop-start. Let's start with Amir Albazi first, Harry. It's been a little bit of a stop-start UFC career for him so far, but if he can come in here against Kai Kara-France and pick up a win against a former interim title, a former title challenger, well, I mean, he's well upon his way of becoming a title contender himself.
I think this is a really odd matchmaking from the UFC. I understand it completely if I'm Kai Kara-France. Because if I'm Kai Kara-France, we kind of need to recycle him a little bit, right? He's been at the top for a long, long, long time. He's faltered in the big moments, right? Obviously, he wins the interim title. That's a huge moment, sure. But in performances before then, he has faltered. And so you shouldn't just get him beating a Manel Cape type or somebody in and around the top 8 and then just chuck him back in, right? Let's see him go, take a step away, allow somebody else to fulfill that ranking that he currently holds, and then we see what happens, right? If he goes out, makes another run, grand, no problem. But for Amir Albazi, this feels like an incredibly big step up. Now, I understand that Amir's 29. We can't be hanging around too long. As we grow older in the flyweight division and in the lower weight divisions, that age really starts to tell. That speed starts to drop off, and that's a massive thing in the lighter weight divisions. But this feels like, you just read out the names, right? The biggest win of all of them is Malcolm Gordon, really. And that's his UFC debut.
Yeah.
He then goes on and fights Zalgas, and we all know what I think about Zalgas. He then goes out and fights, Make-A-Wish Figueiredo, and makes it look easy. And then Alessandro Costa, okay, fine. It's a late replacement. What are you going to do? You can only
for two fighters too. So I think they tried to match him up here with Alex Perez on the day of my birthday last year, 17th of December. Great date. They tried to match him up with Alex Perez, tried to match him up with Brandon Royval as well on that night. Obviously, those two fights fell through, and Alexandro Costa. So look, you're saying maybe it's a little bit of a massive jump up in class, and I kind of agree with you, but I think it's maybe based off the fact is here we tried to match him up with a little bit of a step up, and it's like we've missed that step and we've gone another step up again to kind of top 5, top 3 elite level competition in the division as well, and it'd be interesting to see how he does in it, to be honest.
But this is where I kind of feel like it's kind of a touch of malpractice. Like, okay, if Amir goes in and he's competitive for the whole fight, but loses, fine, no problem. Everyone goes away and they say, well, look, he was competitive, right? And he's not going to take a drastic leap down. If he goes out there and gets destroyed by Kai Kara-France in a couple of rounds, well, then everyone's going to be like, oh, well, he's no good and he's this and he's that. And he never should have been in that sort of level of competition. Because to me, the answer isn't, okay, well, you've been really unfortunate in your last fight. Alex Perez pulls out. Brandon Royval pulls out, fine. And then we've given you this whoever, the Alessandro Costa fight, fine, no problem. I don't think the answer is then, well, now we immediately go to elite level competition. The answer is, we'll just see who's available. We'll just see who's available. Because I can guarantee that it's not just Kai Kara-France that's available. And there's kind of a risk here of, if this goes poorly for Amir Albazi, it hurts his stock drastically at 29. But in the same vein, and I'll play devil's advocate, you have to test him at some point, right?
Sure.
And
yeah.
the last couple haven't been a drastic test, but this to me does feel like you've gone from, watching the bonfire from 6 miles out, and now you're in the middle of the bonfire. Let's see if you burn or not. And I don't know. I as I've talked about ad nauseum on shows before, I am almost always in favor of a slow build for a fighter. And so a massive, massive opportunity for Amir Albazi here, and we'll see if it's too much for him.
Yeah, that's the big question coming in here. Obviously, Kai Kara-France been there, done that, and wore the belt as well as interim champion. He will be, looking for a bit of a resurgence himself after going in there against Brandon Moreno and not having it go his way. And you get a taste of the title, you get a taste of going in there and fighting for a title, and it can either go two ways for certain fighters, and we've seen it happen time and time again. You either get disheartened as a fighter and you kind of continue down that downward trajectory where you maybe love the fight game, but deep down mentally that you might not have the capabilities of competing at the very, very, very top level. Or you can go and you can take that loss and you can bring it back to the gym, and you can go and you can start working again, and you can start changing things up. And, a loss like that can provide some motivation or create a fire under somebody's ass to kind of get back up there and create those opportunities for yourself. And, this is kind of a fight for Kai Kara-France where we're going to find out kind of maybe where he lays on that too, because like you said, I think this is a fairly winnable fight for him, to be honest. I would probably have it as a more winnable fight for Kai Kara-France than it would be for Amir Albazi. And that's obvious given, where both of these guys are ranked in the division. How do you kind of see Kai Kara-France, or maybe taking a look back at the Brandon Moreno fight and maybe taking away some lessons from that fight and bringing them in to some future matchups? Because at the end of the day, Kai Kara-France is only 30 years of age and he's got plenty of time to build back up into that position as well. A win on Saturday night is going to help him do that greatly.
Definitely. I mean, for Kai Kara-France, he sort of, he had a difficult time in the tough house, and then he rebuilds, comes back, and that's sort of kind of been the story of Kai Kara-France. The story of Kai Kara-France has been that he's had the trials, he's had the tribulations, and he's always kind of had to rebuild, but he's always sort of circled upwards rather than downwards. He's always taken a bit of a loss or taken a hit or taken a back step and then found his way back to where he wants to be. And I feel like for me, the fight is... I mean, I shouldn't say this, but in my head, it kind of feels cut and dry in a way, because you go in against Askar Askarov and you perform like Kai Kara-France did and showed incredibly good takedown defense, incredibly good tactical awareness of everything on the feet, and then just bullied Askar Askarov a little bit by the end of that fight. And then we look at the skill set Amir Albazi has, and he's a well-rounded fighter, but his favor, if we look at his finishes, they're kimuras, they're rear naked chokes. He likes to grapple. We know that he was a prominent grappler in his home country of Sweden. He moved to Sweden from Iraq, and that's where his MMA journey started. But in Sweden, he was a coveted grappler. And so we know what the skill set is. And well, without any disrespect, his grappling credentials in comparison to Askar Askarov are not the same. And obviously MMA is not determined purely by credentials and whatever. But it feels to me like a fight kind of tailor-made for Kai Kara-France, because he moves well on the feet. His head moves well. He can crack a little bit. He works the body well. Now, okay, if you go in against elite level competition like Brandon Moreno and you falter, that's fine. That's what happens sometimes. Sometimes you're just not the best guy in the world. And I think that's the case for Kai France. I just don't think he's the best guy in the world, right? I just think Brandon Moreno is better. I think Davison Figueiredo, for his time, was probably better. And that's absolutely fine. Look how coveted Joe Benavidez was. Just wasn't the best fighter in the world, right? And I just, I struggle to see ways in which Amir really grabs a hold of this fight and puts it in his realms, because finding a takedown against Kai France is going to mean that you're going to need to either be a better athlete and be able to break distance quicker than he's able to gain either down blocks, or able to see that shot coming or see that clinch exchange coming. I think that's going to be difficult. Albazi has some really clean fundamental striking, but I feel like the footwork that comes out of that City Kickboxing gym is going to cause problems there. And maybe there's a scramble and we find some submission offense for Albazi. We know in the Malcolm Gordon fight, at least, there was a scramble and he finds a triangle and he locks it up and we're going home very, very early. Fantastic. But I feel that as we get to the elite levels of fighting, finding submissions sort of as not Hail Marys, but during scrambles and in those transitions are far, far, far harder. And so I'm interested. And that's kind of, I'm sort of sitting here and I don't mean to be shitting on Amir Albazi and his chances, but it's kind of like, I haven't seen, and this is where my issue comes with the matchmaking, is I haven't seen Amir go in with an in-between level to be like, oh, okay, actually, I can see these skills translating to somebody of a higher level because I'm watching something comparable here. Alessandro Costa and Francisco Ferreiro are not benchmarks for me to be looking and analyzing a fight against somebody of the quality of Kai France.
100%. And you've spoken time and time again about how good Amir Albazi is here. And it's not like, maybe if anyone is coming in here and saying maybe he's being super critical, you spoke quite highly of him. It's not so much his skill set, it's just, has he been prepared enough? You know, we talked about it a little bit on the breakdowns as well, about giving yourself the right tests at the right time and building your skill set for these moments. And I mean, I didn't want to ask you this question at the start of the preview show, but because we've talked about the fight, because we've broke it down a little bit, is it a little bit of an injustice to the flyweight division that this fight has been chosen as the first fight in the flyweight division to headline in a non-title fight for 6 years?
I mean, if we're going, I think you can answer that question from a couple of different angles. If you're answering it from a purist's perspective, I think the answer is maybe not disrespectful, but we could have maybe hoped for a little bit better. From a promotional perspective, absolutely not. Because if Kai France goes in and looks absolutely fantastic and dominates Amir Albazi and gets the finish or gets a highlight reel, well, that's what we've already established that the UFC is kind of looking for. If Amir Albazi goes in and grabs a win over Kai France, well, then the UFC promotional armies will look at this guy that's risen out of absolutely nowhere. Nobody saw him coming, goes out, beats a debutant in his last one, and now here he is, emerged title contender. And again, so for the UFC, the storylines write themselves very, very easily. But I feel like when we are such celebrants of the flyweight division, as you and I and Shawnee and Spencer and the rest of the SevereMMA guys are, it feels like, and I understand that scheduling is a problem and we make all those caveats before we say these things, I feel like that there could have been better. If the UFC knew that they were scheduling a flyweight main event that is to showcase the flyweights and all of their riches, we could be looking at just some different names.
Yeah. And look, at another person might come up and say it is number 7 versus number 3 in the world, and they would be well within their rights to say that as well. But, you know, maybe an injustice might mean a bit too strong of a word, but I think we've had some very fascinating fights and great showcases. I think the whole Brandon Royval situation with Mateus Nicolau and him calling out the UFC has probably created this as well, where they've just gone, okay, let's get something together real quick. What flyweights do we have coming up here? Let's stick this at the top of the card. Look, we'll talk about the rest of the card. We'll fly through most of these fights. Alex Caceres, like I said, will take on Daniel Pineda in the co-main event. Caceres coming off a good win on the same night. That being said, of Amir Albazi last December, good head kick knockout followed by punches over Julian Juicy J. Rosa. And Daniel Pineda took out Tucker Lutz by a guillotine choke in March of this year. And yeah, lackluster fight for a co-main event. Not one that gets the juices flowing. We ain't going to say too much about it. We're going to move on. We're going to talk about Jim Miller. We're going to talk about Jared Gordon. They are fighting in the lightweight division. And we're always going to give old Jimmy Miller some love here on the preview show. And you know, Jared Gordon, he's worked his way up into these kind of fights. Obviously was a hot topic of conversation given the controversial loss to Paddy Pimblett. Had an accidental clash of heads against Bobby Green a couple of months back as well. And now he's been quite active. He's coming in here against Jim Miller. I believe he's taken this fight at short notice. Jim Miller was matched up with Ludovic Klein coming in here. Obviously, Klein had to withdraw, so fair play to Jared Gordon coming in here, taking on Jim Miller. And it's an interesting stylistic matchup, Harry. Like I said, Jim Miller, a veteran of the game, a guy I quite enjoy, and I feel very wholesome watching him fight. I'm delighted he's still fighting on main cards in 2023. He's setting records for performances and wins and whatnot. He's got a goal to set to try and get to UFC 300, and I hope he can do it. What's your thoughts on this fight?
So I think from a stylistic perspective, they're both kind of similar fighters, right? Like Jim Miller obviously has the coveted guillotine, has a bit more of a guard game, I'd say, more of a guard game in the sense that he's going to be looking for submissions off his back rather than just looking to get up and play on top. Jared Gordon, far more the top player as it were, but both kind of similar on the feet. Both relatively rudimentary in their striking, both relatively rudimentary in the way they move their heads, both happy to sit down on their feet and land some punches, both guys happy to be in the pocket. Just two well-rounded fighters that are about the same level. And like the Ludovic Klein fight, I wasn't really in favor for Jim Miller. Ludovic Klein hits really hard and is certainly fresher in his athletic career than Jim Miller. I mean, so is everyone that's fighting Jim Miller at this point, but you know what I mean? It feels to me like Jared Gordon is about the level that Jim Miller should be fighting at. And so I like this matchup a lot. Like I feel, and we've spoken about this before, but like having a legends division or a veterans division, if you will, you know, you go to a jiu-jitsu competition or your recent football competition, and there's an adults division and there's a masters division, right? And whether that masters division in MMA is quantified by the amount of fights you've had maybe, or even just the age or a bit of both, I feel like for Jim Miller's and for the, you know, Donald Cerrone's and these kind of fighters that are still around and still fighting, I think we still want to see them fight. We still want to see them where they're at least competitive in bouts, but I don't need to see a Jim Miller versus a Ludovic Klein, right? I don't need to see a Jim Miller against the next young and hungry prospect that's coming through with a ton of testosterone and power in his hands. But I would love to see Jim Miller reach UFC 300. I'd love to see Jim Miller in a position like he is now against Jared Gordon, where two evenly matched fighters, nice competitive bout, and may the best man win.
Yeah, it's super necessary, like to have those kind of stylistic fights. We've seen there's two examples. I know the latest one was Matt Brown versus Court McGee. And those are the fights that I enjoy seeing as well. As like I remember looking back at the Conor McGregor documentary, and even that's what he's looking. He said he wants to try and fight on the same card as his son when he's and fight the son's opponent's dad on the same card as well. I like the idea of that. And I mean, if it keeps if it keeps a fighter in the game when they want to keep in the game, if it's going to if it's going to be a detriment for fighters to retire and go through the struggles of retirement, these are the type of fights you need to be making for guys like Jim Miller. Now, I think Jim Miller has shown us enough in recent fights that, we can't be knocking too hard on the door of retirement for Jim Miller. But you know what, Harry, you're only one knockout away. You asked Michael Johnson last week, we don't want to see that. And I don't want to see that for Jim Miller either. But definitely an interesting fight in the middle of the card. Moving on down, Tim Elliott will compete against Victor Altamirano in the 125-pound division. Look, I guess the big story coming into this one, Harry, is the recent hardships and sorrows of Tim Elliott and his personal life coming in here against Victor Altamirano. And you just wonder really and truly where Tim Elliott's head is at coming in here. Maybe fighting is the only thing that's keeping him sane right now, but he's got a tough test ahead of him in Altamirano. Coming off, he's won 2 fights, obviously beating Daniel Deseredo and Vinicius Salvador in his last fight. He's going to have to be at the top of his game coming in here against Altamirano, and I hope he doesn't kind of put some more hardships on what must be a very difficult time for him right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to comment on the personal stuff. If people don't know, you can go on the internet and find out, I'm sure. But it's not, look, it's an intangible variable to this fight, but it's not something that we can quantify, right? And so I look at this fight, and this is a big step up for Altamirano, and a big old step up. And Tim Elliott is a really awkward style. And I kind of feel, we talk about gatekeepers all the time. We throw the names Neil Magny around, and we throw the names Jim Miller around, and we throw the names, Gilbert Burns at the elite level. And there's all these fighters, Brad Tavares, we talk about in the middleweight division. And there's all these fighters. Well, I kind of feel like Tim Elliott fits the bill for breaking into the top 15 or just outside the top 15. And he's a really awkward style. He throws punches at really strange angles. His footwork is really awkward and really off. And he can grapple, right? He loves the scramble. One of my favorite fights of all time is Tim Elliott, Louis Smoker. Not because it was a beautiful display of MMA in its purest, most technical form, but it was just 2 lads scrambling out of a paper bag. Like, it was great. It was so fun from a pure entertainment perspective. And Tim Elliott can bring that. And if you're not ready for that, if you're not available for that, if you don't have enough of a fundamental skill set where you can counteract that type of style, he will beat you. And that's where I'm kind of interested for Altamirano. And that's, where are we? I think this type of fight, this type of matchmaking, this type of push is far less egregious, than the one in the main event.
Yeah.
This is if you lose to Tim Elliott, that's fine. There's nobody expects you to lose. Nobody expects you to beat Tim Elliott necessarily, because he is that gatekeeper. He is playing that role. This is your first medium-sized test. And this is the type of test that I would like to see for a fighter with a record of 12-2 and 2-0 in the UFC. For Tim Elliott, this is a fight for him to be like, just where are we now in your career? We've had a ton of fights, ton of performances in the UFC. Is this your level now? Or can we start to progress Tim Elliott just a touch more? Because I don't think we're going to be seeing Tim Elliott fight a 5+ fighter. I don't think we're going to see Tim Elliott with a sub-10 ranking next to his name again. But if he's going to hang out in the 13 to 15 range for the rest of his career, I'd have no problem with that.
Yeah, that's it. It'll be interesting to see how long left he has in him at 36 years of age, fighting in the lower weight classes as well. A very, very difficult thing to do. I feel every time I hear you talking about Tim Elliott, he's definitely a first draft Team Powell pick, I would imagine, Harry. Why do you like his style so much? I do quite enjoy it. It's the wildness of it, the wildness on the feet, the wildness in the scrambles, the tough nature and the heart and grit that he's always shown in there. I mean, you know that you're going to be entertained every time you see Tim Elliott step inside the octagon, win or lose.
Yeah, so I think really my enjoyment of Tim Elliott comes from sort of a philosophical approach to fighting, and that's that in one way, I am somebody that really appreciates the acutely tuned fine, refined, sharp sword of technique, right? You and I have discussed ad nauseum how much I enjoyed Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski, Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan, how much I enjoyed Gamrot Tsarukyan. You know, these types of fights where we see just beautiful displays of fine-tuned, sharply defined technique being used against one another and the counters to those things. I love that because it's a very expressly showcased way of how fighting can be at the elite level. Well, then you get Tim Elliott, who has clearly understood the merits of all of that, but chosen to go his own way. And when you find somebody that just takes a slight step off the center line and looks at fighting a different way, he has an understanding of the fundamental principles of fighting. He understands what head movement means. He understands what footwork means. He understands the fundamental grappling principles, but he just approaches them from a slightly different way. And it causes absolute fucking mayhem for lads. It causes mayhem for himself at the same time, because when he comes up against a fighter that is more fundamentally sound and will adhere to those principles greatly, he loses. Fine. But I think it's important for people like Tim Elliott, with his style, with his stance on fighting, with his philosophy to who he is inside the octagon, it's important for those people to exist. Because not only do we get to see guys like Alta Moreno is going to go in there and we're going to find out what level he is. Does he have the minerals? Does he have the fundamental understanding to go in and beat a guy with that style? But you'll also see innovations from a guy like Tim Elliott, because some stuff will work that nobody expects to work. And then you get a fighter that goes away and says, oh, fuck, how did that work? We need to figure out how to stop that from working next time. We need to figure out where we're going to do or what we're going to do when that sort of thing appears next time. And so people like Tim Elliott, especially in the innovative side of mixed martial arts, need to exist, in my opinion.
Indeed, fantastic answer to that question. I don't think you're going to get a better answer out there to a question like that. One of the rare breeds in mixed martial arts is Tim Elliott, and he will take on Victor Altamirano this Saturday night, 125 pounds. Next on the agenda, Karine Silva versus Caitlin Souza in the 125-pound women's division. Fighting for a spot in that shit hot division. It's a fight that we're not going to spend too much time on. We're going to move on. We wish both we wish good luck to both of those women. We'll talk about that fight on the breakdowns as it happens. We're going to move on to the opener on the main card, and that's Gurham Kutteladze versus Jamie Malarkey in the 155-pound lightweight division. And it's a good stylistic matchup. It's Harry has described it as the best fight on the card. Let's just get straight into it. Let me break it down. Look at good Kutteladze coming in after a split decision loss from Damiris Magulov. Jamie Malarkey himself didn't have the best run to look against Jalen Turner, but has turned around with this split decision win over Michael Johnson and a unanimous decision win over Francisco Prado in his last fight. Why do you label this fight the best fight on the card, Harry?
I label this fight the best fight on the card because Gurham Kutteladze is a seriously dark horse in this lightweight division. He's 31, and so we're going to need to kick on a little bit. But you do not go to a split decision going either way with a Mateusz Gamrot and a Damiris Magulov if you're not an elite level fighter. You just don't, right? You just don't. Both Damiris Magulov and Mateusz Gamrot are absolutely fantastic fighters. And so when I look at Gurham Kutteladze and I look at the length, I look at his striking ability, I look at his ability to stuff takedowns, I look at his ability to grapple himself, it's just extremely exciting. He's one of those influx of Georgian fighters that has sort of taken the UFC by storm, really. And I feel like in this fight, Jamie Malarkey is probably a level underneath Gurham Kutteladze, but he's tough and he comes forward and he hits hard. And we also saw Francisco Prado comes in, never lost a fight before, never been outside of to the judges' scorecard, I should say. He's finished every single performance that he's been in previous to that. And Jamie Mullarkey comes in and says, "That's great, mate. No problem. I'm just going to jab your face off, and I'm going to stay out of the way of those big hooks, and my footwork's going to be better than yours is, and my head movement's going to be better than yours is. I'm just going to take you down a little bit, and I'm going to drag you into these deep waters, and I'm going to show you that maybe I won't win a title. Maybe I won't have a single-digit number next to my name in my UFC career, but what I will have is an ability to show people what level actually exists in the UFC at 155 pounds." And so I think this fight has the makings of absolute fireworks, and I'm really, really excited for it.
Who do you think has the advantage coming in here? Obviously, you said that Jamie Mullarkey does have that toughness, and that toughness will stand to him. Overall body of work, I would be kind of definitely leaning on Guram Kurtalaze's side and what he has to offer here. But, Mullarkey is no easy out here. It's kind of the perfect test for Guram. And, if he gets past Jamie Mullarkey, who is a well-known, unranked guy at 155 right now, you're looking at a real stride towards the top 15 rankings, really. Maybe not quite there yet, but you're not too far away if you get a good win over Jamie Mullarkey.
I am gonna, as you know, I don't really like doing picks and stuff like that, but I think Guram Kurtalaze is going to finish Jamie Mullarkey inside 2. I just think he hits too hard. I think his ability to stuff the takedown is too good. And whilst Jamie Mullarkey is tough, there's a limit to everybody's toughness, right? I just think the body kicks are going to add up. I think that the leg kicks are going to add up. And I just think Guram is too accurate and hits too hard. And it's a tough ask for Jamie Mullarkey in this fight. Obviously, this is mixed martial arts. Anything can happen. But I feel like if he can't gain the respect of Guram early, it's going to be tough.
I love the way you say, I don't like giving predictions, and then you say, he's going to win, and this is the round he's going to win, and you give an exact prediction. I love it. It's great. But that's going to be a great fight. I'm really looking forward to that fight as well. Next on deck, Alessio Zaleski coming in here based off his win, unanimous decision win over Benoit Saint-Denis way back in 2021. He takes on Abu Bakr Nurmagomedov, who has a unanimous decision win coming into this fight, and also has a unanimous decision win 2 in a row over Jared Gordon, who's also on this card as well. He beat Ghazi Omarzagayev in his last fight, and I like Alessio Zaleski. I like his style of fight. I think he's pretty well rounded. He likes to attack, but he's limited on the kind of skill set of opponents that he can beat too. We've seen him in there producing good performances, but we've also seen him in there losing spectacularly as well. Anything that gets you going about this fight at all, Harry?
So I think that the thing I'm interested in here is, for me, Zaleski doesn't attack enough. Like, he is an attacking fighter, but he's very much a load up, one, done, go again. And against somebody like Nurmagomedov, that's just not enough, because he's going to watch that load up come and he's going to take you down, and then it's going to be tough for you, right? So the question for me here is Nurmagomedov going to read the offensive work of Zaleski dos Santos, take him down and win a decision that way? Or are we going to see Zaleski up the pace a little bit and put a little bit more effort, a little bit more output, a little bit more volume to his striking? Because if he does, then it becomes more interesting. Abu Bakr Nurmagomedov isn't somebody that's going to shy away from striking exchanges, but obviously his grappling prowess is where his skill set is. And so, yeah, if I'm Zaleski, I'm going to up some volume. I'm going to kick his legs. I'm going to try and kick his body. We know that he loves a spinning kick. And so let's see. But I foresee, if I'm going to do picks, I just think that Nurmagomedov will grind him out.
It'd be interesting to see. He has not fought since that Benoit Saint-Denis fight in 2021. And you know what? What?
I don't blame him.
Remember?
insane
Yeah,
beat.
I know. That was a crazy one, but he absolutely beat Benoit Santini from pillar to post, as did Benoit Santini obliged him in the opposite direction as well. But I thought he was unlucky not to get a finish in that fight at stages. Remember, that was the fight where the referee was pulled away, and we've mentioned it time and time again on this preview show. But I think he kind of did up his output there and kind of probably got tired from beating on Benoit Saint-Denis. I know that second round he got off a lot of shots where the referee could have came in 3 or 4 times. So it'll be interesting to see what he has. Obviously, this is going to be a way different stylistic matchup with Abu Bakr coming in here looking to try and grapple more, whereas that Benoit Saint-Denis did try and stand and bang. For the majority of that other fight. So look, let's whip down through. Before I whip down through the rest of the fights, Harry, is there anything that tickles your fancy on the rest of the prelims card here? We have John Castaneda taking on Muin Gafarov in the 135-pound division. We've got Andrei Arlovsky taking on Dontel Mays at 265 pounds. In the heavyweight division, Daniel Santos and Johnny Munoz Jr. at 135. That's going to be a pretty decent fight. We have Jinyu Frey versus Ellis Reed at 115 in the strawweight division. I mean, it's not a great fight either. Lon Lacerda versus Damon Blackshear in the 135-pound division, and Maxim Grishin versus Philip Lins kicks off the action in the 205-pound division. Out of all the fights that I've named there, Harry, is there anyone that you're kind of shining a spotlight on? The floor is yours, my man.
For sure. So I think it's more just individual fighters that I'm interested in seeing. Like we have the Grabaka Hitman, Kaposa, depending on how you call him. He's mentioned Muin Gafarov and said that he's an absolute savage, and we've seen some highlight reels come out of that account. So always, if there's a Kaposa cosign, if there's a Kaposa stamp of approval, I am ready to watch. I am available. You can sign me up whenever you're ready. I will never turn down a Jinyu Frey fight. I know that that's maybe a controversial opinion, but I just think that the real problem is there's not an atomweight division in the UFC, and Jinyu Frey, if there was, would 110% be an atomweight. But I do think she has an interesting striking style. It doesn't translate well into 115 because she's always outside, she's always outgunned. But I do enjoy watching her fight. Luan Lacerda versus Damone Blackshear. I like Damone Blackshear. I think he's a guy that if he could put it together would be a really good fighter. But the question is, will he? And the only other person. Go on.
Yeah, I think Damon Blackshear did very well against Farid Basharat and kind of caused a lot of issues in that fight. And I agree with you. He seems like a guy that has a good win in him, but we haven't seen it yet. And that only leaves us with one last fight. Any thoughts on Maxim Grishin versus Philip Lins?
I am only interested to see how Philip Lins continues to look at 205. Because if he looks good, there's an interesting new name there. If he goes out, Maxim Grishin is going to push him against the fence, and if he can't get Maxim Grishin off him, then whatever. We go, and it's just another guy.
And that's it. We'll find that out early on the night this Saturday night as this UFC card goes down. We're not going to spend any more time on the card. It was fun. Look at us. In the words of the great Brock Lesnar, we tried to turn some chicken shit into chicken salad here. And I think we did a pretty good job of it too, Harry, at the same time. Kai Kara France, Amir Albazi, they will compete in the headline in the first flyweight non-title fight in 7 years. Tune in and watch it, because I don't want fucking redheaded Dana coming in after this fight and saying, well, that's why we didn't put in, because nobody watched it. It's going to be a good fight. The flyweight division should get the love and support. Hashtag fly never die. We'll be back. Maybe not the way timeline is working. We might have a little break from Harry as he's going away to deal with some he has some things to look after. I don't want to give the whole game away. It's not my place to do it. He might be missing the breakdown show this week, but I'll be back to break it down with Johnny or Graham or one of the lads anyway, and take a look at this card. Until then, folks, take care. Enjoy the fights this weekend. Look after yourselves. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Hit up Harry Powell at BJJ_Harry Powell at O'Neill MMA. Head over to the SevereMMA Patreon. Check out all the good stuff over there. It just keeps coming and coming and coming and coming, and we ain't going to stop. Take care, friends. We'll see you again soon.